to do my book of the month review for my book of the month, and that is The Book Thief. This is another one of the books I got my husband to pick out for me. I gave him just a pile of books I hadn't read off my shelf, or in this case, hadn't read recently. Got him to pick them, and I'm just working my way through them. I'm getting to the bottom of the pile. I'll have to do a new one soon, but I always like seeing what he thinks I should prioritize reading, because I know we have very different tastes. Anyways, on to the review. So I'm just going to start with a brief kind of intro summary. I know a lot of people know this already about The Book Thief, but going into it, you need to realize that the narrator that you're following is Death, and he's telling the story of this girl through his time during when this book is taking place, and then we're getting snippets of her life as well. So if you don't know that going in, it can be like a smidge confusing. And I know that using this kind of narrator makes it'll make or break the read for you. There seem to be very little in between. Overall, I found this book to be a very touching read. You meet this girl Liesel, and this is kind of her life in Nazi Germany during leading up to and during the Second World War. And it's just interesting little snippets of the life of someone who was living in Germany at the time. And Liesel herself is just a very interesting character. I really enjoyed following her exploits. You know where the book is going, just because Death is a sucky storyteller sometimes. With that statement out of the way, I'm going to talk a little bit about the plot and my thoughts on it. Overall, I enjoyed that the story was pretty straightforward. There weren't a lot of twists and turns. And any twists and turns that were there, you sort of knew about in advance. Like, Death was dropping spoilers like nobody's business about this story. So, like, you do know where it's going ahead of time. There are a few twists and turns in, like, how they're going there, or twists and turns in once the story is kind of elaborated upon and it's not just his statement that you're going off of. However, the plot is very plotting, which is leading me into the story progression. It's slow. And it's because you constantly have a variety of obstacles, which isn't, like, they're not unnecessary obstacles. I personally didn't find that the story dragged, but I know the number of obstacles could make it drag for other people. And just because you're getting the story from Death, he's telling it to you almost like it's a bedtime story, so you're getting little snippets at a time, but then it pauses and it'll jump forward or backward, or Death will talk about a specific instance where he'll then elaborate on how it connects to Liesel's story. And so while the pacing is like consistently slow, how it's told causes it to lose a lot of momentum. And so it ends up being very staggered. Like I said, I personally really enjoyed it because it made the story feel like a slow burn, and you really got to know the characters and the situation and everything that was going on. But I completely 100% recognize that it will be way too slow for a lot of people, which will lead me just into touching on the characters briefly. I loved how eclectic they were. You had just such an interesting and unique mix of characters. I love that while some of them were a little bit flatter or weirder, all of them had this flavor of like a childlike perception over them. Like they were filtered through, almost like they were filtered through Liesel's eyes. They sort of were and sort of weren't. But it made exploring the characters a lot more interesting, because as she got older, as Liesel gets older in the story, you realize that there's a lot more depth to a lot of the characters, and it was just really fun to explore that with her. And with these things out of the way, I'm going to touch on a couple pros and cons in terms of like things that I think will get you to, or will have you put off picking up this book. I'll start with my pros. The first one is that I think it's a very beautiful story about this girl and essentially this found family. Like, she is kind of forced into the initial situation, but she really takes the people surrounding her and makes them her family as she gets used to the situation and as she grows and develops. And my other positive here is I love how you get a sense of the time for kind of like the average person, especially given what Nazi Germany was stood for, or not Nazi Germany, what the Nazi Party stood for, and what the resulting Nazi Germany was like. Because the story takes place in a very poor street, and you just get a really good sense of the people who, while they haven't been like super negatively affected by the Nazi Party because, you know, they're German, they're Aryan, they're not Jewish, they're also some of the people that have been left behind. And I loved the way that played out and the way you got to know the characters and the things they did and their depth of character because of all of these other things going on. I really, really appreciated it. And now, I'll move on to my cons. Both of them are kind of in regards to how the story is written. Although I personally didn't mind that the story was kind of very slow and plodding and gave me kind of a slow burn in terms of getting to know the characters, the slow pace will make it very, very hard for people to get into if they're not sure about the book, or if, like, even knowing what the book was about, the first few chapters were very slow to get into because although you know it's building to something, it's not doing it quickly. And even as far as cold opens go, the cold open for this book was slow paced. And then the other negative is that this isn't a traditional plot. As I mentioned, Death likes to tell you what's coming ahead of time. So you're never surprised, you know where it's going. This is really, like I said, being told to you almost like a bedtime story. And I know a common criticism I've heard is that nothing is really happening in the book. And I understand why people say that. It's because it's slow. It's because it's telling a story that you already know what's going to happen. And so you're constantly just circling back around. And I know that will not hit the spot for some people. I'm very, very aware of that. All right. So from here, I'm going to move to my wrap up and then onto my VBC questions, which someday I hope to do on a server with people who want to talk about the book I'm reading. Not yet, but hopefully someday. Okay, and so with this book, I give it a 4 out of 5 stars. Overall, I did enjoy it immensely. I really, really liked reading it. I'm torn on whether or not I would go back for another round as an adult again, but I enjoyed Death as the narrator. Although the pacing was slow, I felt it really did justice to the characters. And personally, the plot and a lot of the subject matter just really caught my attention and held it. I've mentioned several times when talking about historical fiction that World War II historical fiction hits like a special spot for me. I don't know what it is, and I know a lot of people, even myself to some extent, think that it's overdone. But I will always pick it up because there's something about that time that resonates with me and makes me want to keep reading it. And as I mentioned in the beginning, with Death as the narrator, that will really make or break the book for you. Some people might find it that it puts you off the story entirely. Some people, like myself, find it really engaging. And then that mixed with the pace just makes this like a really iffy book to recommend, because this is a book I don't think I'd recommend unless I knew you really well, because you would either love it or hate it and be cursing me. And here, that's really all I have to say about the book. Like, I really liked it, and that's for the reasons I've already mentioned. So I'm going to give you a quick warning here. Although I haven't really been pulling punches too much with spoilers, in the VBC questions and the virtual book club questions, there will be spoilers. No doubt about it. And so if you don't want to be spoiled, this is where you should click off. And with that, I will jump into these questions. The first one is, what is your initial reaction? For me, my initial reaction was like a lot of engagement and intrigue, because I really, really like the idea of death as a narrator, and the first few pages really captured. Second, what is your favorite chapter or scene? I found it really hard to pick one, because there was a lot in this book that I liked, and a lot that I felt did a lot of good work for the characters. But basically any scene where Rudy is discontent with the Hitler Youth leaders was just like, I was living for it. Rudy is one of my favorite characters in the book. Just the way he comes off, the kind of friend he is, and just like the promise of his character, just all gets rolled up into this like really fun kid, and I really enjoy following him, especially when he's like cursing out the Nazis. Question 3, how did the characters change throughout the story? The characters actually changed quite a bit here. They started off pretty young, and I think the story took place from the late 30s into kind of towards the end of the war. Middle to end of the war. And as a result, I got to watch these kids grow up. Liesel, especially Liesel, really came into herself. She was growing up, she was maturing, and she was just like gaining not only just like confidence in who she was, but she was really exploring a lot of different things. Like, you got a sense that she knew who she was, but she also was interested in finding out who other people really were. And it just made for some really interesting interactions, and it made the ending that much more devastating for me. Question 4, how did you like the ending? I liked it well enough. I mean, you know what's coming, and you know it's bad, but I mean, it was an ending. It was well written. It wasn't the most amazing ending, and it wasn't unexpected. Because, like I said, death tells you what's going on. You know what's going to happen. Question 5, would you read more by this author? I actually have read more by this author already. I didn't realize it at the time. I don't know why, because it says on the cover. But I read Bridge of Clay, which was one of his more recent releases. And I never did a review on it. I think I did a review on Goodreads. So I'll include that link in the description box below if I reviewed it. Who knows? I'll figure it out when I'm editing. Yeah, no. And based off my experience here and my experience there, I would definitely pick another book up by Mark Zusak. And then finally, it says, what other books does this book remind you of? Not unexpectedly, this book reminds me of the other book I've read by him, Bridge of Clay, although the topics aren't quite the same. They both have kind of a unique way of approaching death and talking about death and talking about family. And so there's overlap there in similarity, but otherwise they're very different. This book also gives me similar vibes to All the Light We Cannot See. All the Light We Cannot See is definitely an adult, like a more adult read than I would say The Book Thief is, but just very similar pacing, a similar break in the storytelling, not because you're getting spoiled by death, but like the time jumps between story chunks is very similar. And at least, especially with like Werner's storyline, there's a lot of overlap there in kind of like what it was like to be in Germany and just be like swept up in the Nazi social engineering machine. And so like there's similarities there. I'm not gonna say you're gonna love All the Light You Cannot See if you loved The Book Thief, but I think there's enough there that it's worth picking up to try. And that's all I have for you guys today. I will leave you here, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace!